Absolutely. Well, having said that, I think we're just going to go ahead and bring our special guest up, and it is the aforementioned Dr. James Fetzer. Dr. James Fetzer, welcome to the program.
Well, thanks, Mark. And Mark, I'm really glad to be here, and I appreciated being on Mark's show earlier, and I really enjoyed having you on my show recently, Mark, where it can be found archived at radiofetzer.blogspot.com. Radiofetzer.blogspot.com is the archive for the real deal. And you'll find my interview with Mark beginning with the USS Liberty attack, where he co-authored the book, What I Saw That Day, which is a stunning and gripping recount of the attack by the Israeli Air Force on this American spy ship, which was clearly identified, quite deliberate and vicious, including even the strafing of the life rafts, which is an international war crime. Mm-hmm. It was a great interview, Mark. I really appreciated having you on. And with regard to this Reverend Jones, I would say there are quite a few of my studies about 9/11, which can be found at my blog, jamesfetzer.blogspot.com. But also, you can find one from Buenos Aires on the website for Scholars for 9/11 Truth, the organization I founded, which is at the website 911scholars.org.
Okay, so Dr. Fetzer, you are more or less a convinced skeptic, if we can put those two seemingly opposing terms together, as far as the quote-unquote official statement as to who pulled off 9/11 and why. Why don't you just, before we get into the day's events, just give the people here a brief synopsis as to why the story that they have put out, the mainstream media, and our government, of course, that it just does not add up.
Well, there's actually a statement of 20 refutations of the official account you can find at 911scholars.org in the upper left-hand corner under the heading, Why Doubt 9/11, where I enumerate many of the actually impossibilities that are attendant to the government's official account, including the fact that the fires did not burn hot enough or long enough to cause the steel to weaken, much less melt, that a collapse of those buildings, steel structure high-rises, was a physical impossibility, that no buildings of that kind as steel high-rises had ever collapsed due to fire before 9/11, nor after 9/11, nor, if our research is correct, on 9/11, that there were massive explosions in the sub-basements of both buildings before reverberations from above that were attributed to the impact of the aircraft. Two members of 9/11 Scholars, Gordon Ross and Craig Furlong, were so captivated by William Rodriguez's report of this explosion before there were reverberations from above that they tracked down FAA and radar data and compared it with seismic data obtained by a university observatory, and discovered that they occurred as much as 14 to 17 seconds before the reverberations from above. Obviously, these are things that 19 Islamic terrorists could never have done. Indeed, the very competent scholar of 9/11, Elias Davidson, Davidson, has published a study you can find online. Just Google 9/11, Elias Davidson, the 9/11 hijackers, no proof, where he has established that the government has never presented any proof that any of these hijackers were aboard any of these aircraft. David Ray Griffin, who is the leading expert on 9/11 with 7 or 8 books now, has recently published 2 articles in Global Research in which he explains that the alleged phone calls that were made from the 4 airliners, some supposedly from cell phones, others from airphones, were all of them faked. In fact, A.K. Dudney, a computer scientist from Western Ontario, had taken 3 types of cell phones and flown around the country and discovered that about 200 miles an hour or 2,000 feet, the cell phones don't work because the relay towers can't switch the signals fast enough. Colonel George Nelson, a U.S. Air Force retired expert, has observed that among the millions of uniquely identifiable component parts, from those 4 aircraft. The government has never produced a single one. I have obtained FAA registration data that shows 2 of the flights were still registered into 2002 and the other 2 until 2005, implying they were still flying long after these purported crashes took place. There was lots of fraud at the Pentagon. The pilots for 9/11 Truth have discovered that based upon black box data they were given by the National Transportation Safety Board, purportedly from Flight 77. The data shows a plane approaching the building on the perpendicular, almost a due east heading, when in fact, according to the official account, the plane was coming in on a northeasterly heading nearly at an acute angle in relation to the building, just skimming the ground. The pilots have discovered that the plane corresponding to the black box data was in fact 300 feet in the air too high to take out any of the lampposts, when it would have been 1 second from impact with the building, that it was still 100 feet too high, and then it swerved over the building and did not hit it, which is consistent with a complete lack of appropriate debris, the absence of the wings, the tail, body, seats, fuselage. In fact, Jamie McIntyre from CNN, who was the first on the scene, responded to an inquiry from the anchor for a CNN broadcast who was asking about the plane, and he said that from his close-up inspection, there was no indication of any plane having hit anywhere near the Pentagon, which was, a remarkably candid observation on his part. And subsequently, after 2 lime green civilian fire trucks extinguished the very modest fires that were associated with the purported crash, there was a secondary explosion in a part of the roof of the Pentagon collapsed. But more importantly, when the Congress was warned that the Capitol might be under attack, and all the members of the House and Senate poured out onto the steps in front of the Capitol, they looked across the Potomac and saw billowing black clouds emerging from what turned out to have been a series of enormous dumpsters in front of the building. When I was still living in Duluth, Minnesota in 2006, a fellow who knew my research on this came by and showed me 44 more slides. I had 3 that I use in my basic presentation about what happened on 9/11, where you could see light in between the dumpsters and the building, and all of the smoke is coming from the dumpsters. None of it's coming from the building. This was a classic Hollywood-style special effect. In fact, there's one piece of fuselage that has been frequently photographed that came from a Boeing 757 that an attorney in Columbus, Ohio, by the name of James Hansen, is traced back to a crash in Cali, Colombia in 1995. There's a little piece of root there, a vine that's ripped it off of the fuselage when it crashed in the jungles there. As far as what happened in Shanksville, the official account has it that this plane is not visible because it crashed into an abandoned mine shaft, which is simply absurd when you consider that we know what to do with miners who are trapped in mine shafts. We bring up the bright lights and the heavy equipment, and we dig 24/7 in the hope that by some miracle someone may have survived. Well, in this case, it was obviously an obligation to recover the bodies, even if no one had survived, and yet none of that was done. No bright lights, no 24/7 heavy equipment digging. Instead, they tidied up the scene. They even trimmed the bushes that had been burned so they could not be subjected to a chemical analysis to determine what had been the source of the fires that caused them. The whole thing is a sham and a fraud, and it's very clear in retrospect, as I explained during a freedom rally in front of the Capitol, on the grass behind the Capitol, on the 15th of April 2008. A talk I gave at a rally in honor of Ron Paul, 9/11 and the neocon agenda, that this all appears to have been done for 3 principal motives, namely to take possession of Iraqi oil, number 2, to benefit Israel, which would include running a pipeline from Iraq through Israel to the Mediterranean, which the Israelis could have tapped into to solve all their energy problems, and then 3rd, this neoconservative ideology of creating, since the United States was now the sole remaining superpower with the demise of the Soviet Union, creating a worldwide empire, which necessitated projecting American military and diplomatic force into the Middle East and then outward from that geopolitically sensitive area as they wrote about in documents associated with a think tank known as Project for the New American Century, where they bemoaned that there was this unique historic opportunity, but the American people would be unlikely to support wars of aggression invading Iraq and Afghanistan if there were not some traumatizing catalytic event such as a new Pearl Harbor, and given they needed this to inspire the American people to support their agenda in violation of international law, the UN Charter, and even the U.S. Constitution, they made it happen. I'm sorry to say the whole thing is a sham and a fraud, and the American people have been manipulated by the use of violence and threats of acts of violence, which is a classic definition of terrorism, which really means that the American people have been subjected to terrorism by their own government.
Well, the frightening thing, Dr. Fetzer, is not so much that these dark forces were able to pull off 9/11 with the loss of life that took place, but rather that almost 10 years into it now, the American people still, for the most part, believe the official story, or at least they believe it enough not to rock the boat with regards to wanting to know the truth. They're still going about their lives. They're still forking over their tax money to pay for these wars. They're still electing the same politicians. Their interest in rocking the boat, politically speaking, by asking questions, by even going to websites. I know lots of people who, even though they don't believe the quote-unquote official story with regards to 9/11 and what it has brought us today, they are so afraid of getting on some list that they won't even go on any websites to read any of the truth. And so that is the thing that frightens me the most in terms of where all of this is going. It's not that these dark forces were necessarily able to pull off 9/11, but that they are able to continue to propagate this to really what is going to be ultimately, if they get their way, the destruction of the United States. Now, where I want to bring this discussion today is...
Mark, let me just make one addendum, because you're really making a terribly important point. Even our new president, Obama, whom I expected to wind down these wars, rescind the Patriot Act, abolish the Military Commissions Act, get our country back on a firm constitutional footing, which has, of course, not happened, as well as ending the wars in the Middle East, when he sent 30,000 more troops into Afghanistan, did so using the justification that this was the region from which we were attacked and that we still needed to track down Osama bin Laden, who, however, appears to have died around December 15th of 2001. There were reports and obituaries at the time. There have been many fake videos and audios since that time that have been discussed, for example, in press releases from scholars, but where David Ray Griffin, just this last year, published a new book entitled Osama bin Laden, Dead or Alive, bringing together, collating the evidence that he had died on or about that date. I mean, it's embarrassing to me that the President of the United States would offer such a false justification for our presence there. If he wanted to say we're there to protect the poppy fields because the CIA is the biggest drug dealer in the world, that would be at least have the ring of truth. If he wanted to say we were out there because we wanted to take control of the largest lithium deposit in the world, as Jesse Ventura has recently observed, that too would have the ring of truth. Or that we're to be there to protect a pipeline across northern Afghanistan, that too would have the ring of truth. But to say we were there because of 9/11 implies that either he knows no better and is some kind of dupe, or else that he is deliberately lying to the American people. And I'm sorry to say there are no additional alternatives available to us.
No, and I think that the powers that be recognize that they can only keep the lid on things like this for so long, and that there is going to be counter pressure against it. And so they will allow quote-unquote dissident opinions to come out, like Jesse Ventura's. You can throw darts at the dartboard all day long. As long as you don't hit the bullseye, you can throw them all over the place and rack up all kinds of points. You can even